Hello, everybody. My name is Brian Puente. I support Adobe Creative Cloud at the University of Arizona. And today we are going to be talking about getting started with Photoshop. So, in this online workshop, we'll cover some Photoshop basics, including retouching, how to do some basic color correction, and then work with layers. And then we'll cover some more things too, but those will kind of be the general principles that we're going to be covering here. I do have chat open and available, so feel free to ask questions as we go along. I'm pretty good at checking the chat kind of as we go, and I'm happy to stop and clarify anything that you'd like. This workshop should run until about 5 p.m. and will be available for playback later, both on this YouTube channel where you're watching this and on our website, adobe.arizona.edu. Cool. So, without any kind of further ado, let's go ahead and start taking a preliminary look at Photoshop. Cool. So, I always like to start these types of things by like, what is Photoshop? Chances are you've heard of it before. It's a verb at this point. But basically, what Photoshop allows us to do is it allows us to manipulate photographs and create designs so that we can develop whatever it is we want to see visually. So, Photoshop is a raster based program, which means that it uses like its final output is individual pixels. So like an individual pixel count across by pixel count down is what we're looking for here. So you may have heard of like 1080p, like in a movie. 1080p is a box that is 1920 pixels across by 1080 pixels down. That kind of dimension, pixel by pixel, is what Photoshop is built to output. It's a raster based program as opposed to a vector based program, which uses lines and curves to basically create illustrations using math. And then basically that's scalable infinitely. But basically, within this workshop, we're going to be talking about some of the different things we can do with Photoshop. We're going to stick with the basics here. But we'll focus on kind of how to get you up and running and kind of get you moving throughout the application. If you have an iPad, I don't know if it's only iPad Pro, I'll have to check, but basically Photoshop does have a versions available on the iPad. It's pretty robust. That's not what we're going to be focusing on here. We're going to be focusing on Photoshop for the desktop. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Cool. Like I said, feel free to post questions in the chat as we go. I'm happy to do my best to answer them, and we'll leave about 5-10 minutes at the end to kind of deal with any specific questions you have. Cool. Alrighty. So, in order to introduce you to Photoshop, let's introduce you to Photoshop. So, when you first launch Photoshop, you should see a menu that looks very similar to this. So, when you launch it, lots of different things are presented to you, lots of menus with buttons and clicky things. But basically, what we're looking at here is you need to decide what it is that you want to work with inside of Photoshop. You can open up images by right-clicking and then hit open in Photoshop, and it will open it in those dimensions. But typically, when you're working in Photoshop, there's a desired output that you want or a desired file size that you want or something like that. So typically what you would do is you would, excuse me, create a document. And we'll go ahead and go with and there's photos, prints, illustrations, web, mobile. So these are kind of the different spaces that you're going to be in and kind of the final outputs that you have here. So let's go ahead and go with a photo. And we're going to go ahead and do a 5x7 photo. And then you'll see over here in the preset panel, and I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see that. You can create a preset yourself here. You can put your height and width. So you'll see the width is 7 and the height is 5. That makes it a landscape, and a landscape is wider than it is tall. So if we wanted to flip the orientation, then it would be 5 inches across by 7 inches down, and that would be a portrait. The resolution is set to 300 pixels per inch. So the reason why it's set to 300 pixels per inch is because when you have a photo, typically you want photos printed, and whenever you print something, you want your resolution of the print to be about 300 pixels per inch, because that's the standard for printing. If you were doing something for a web, for example, like if you're building something that's going to live on a web page exclusively, you click on that, you'll see that our resolution is set to 72 pixels per inch. that's plenty for web and things like that. Nothing we had to dig into too much, but just want to make sure that you had an idea of what that meant. There are also different color modes like RGB and CMYK. RGB is basically for anything that's going to be on a screen, and then CMYK is typically what you will use when you print. But we're just going to leave these as defaults for now. Then we'll hit create, and this will create our new document here. Now, we'll come back to this in a little bit, but we're going to go ahead and get started with showing you how to learn more about what Photoshop is. So, this is a this is a document that's available inside of all modern versions of Photoshop. So if you wanted to open it up yourself, you can, with Photoshop launched, you can go to Learn, and then under Learn, there's a Welcome to Photoshop section. There's a Photoshop tour and things like that where I can kind of guide you through it, but we're going to go ahead and click on Photoshop tour here. Then I'm just going to hit this little button right up here to collapse this down, and then here's our document. The reason why I point that out is because if you want to try it yourself, it's there for you. So now I'm going to go ahead and we're going to start navigating around Photoshop here. So basically there are a few places we want to look when we're working with Photoshop. This left-hand bar over here are our tools. I'll zoom in over here. We have all these different tools that we're going to be that we can use. When you hover over them, Photoshop's pretty great in offering you a little preview of what each tool does. When you hover over, a little video will play on modern versions of Photoshop, which is really nice. So we have the quick selection tool. The ones that we're going to be using are the move tool. That's the V. You press V for the keyboard shortcut for that. That's one of my go-to shortcuts. Basically, this is the regular click on stuff to move it around tool here. And then we have the quick selection tool. This basically lets you make selections by clicking and dragging. These little running ants that show up here mean that a selection is made. That's how you will cut stuff out in Photoshop, or select individual things for specific targeted manipulation. And we'll get to that in a little bit. One thing I'll note here, and I'll zoom in a little bit, hopefully you can see that. Whoops. So when you, pardon me here one moment. When you click on this little drop down here, you may notice there's a little notch right there, this little like end of a page here. If you click and hold on that, you'll see the additional tools available underneath there. So you'll see object selection, quick selection, and then magic wand. These are all different selection tool types. But the reason why I bring this up is because a lot of tools that you'll be switching between tools in Photoshop once you kind of feel comfortable in doing a lot with it. And you'll often have to switch between some of the same tools to get the results that you want as you kind of get deeper into things. So this little dog here, a little like page icon, means that there's additional content underneath. Cool. And then the other thing that we'll be using probably is the spot healing brush tool. It looks like a little band-aid. It's right here. Cool. So now that we have that, these are our tools, and we may play with other ones, but that's basically what we'll work with. Next up is this right-hand side over here. What I want you to focus on is this bottom right-hand corner. These are our layers here. So Photoshop is a layer-based program. That means that it works top to bottom to show you all of the different layers that are available in your composition here. And we'll kind of take a look at all of those in a second. So basically, if you think of it like the way that I've heard it described is like a pizza. So with a pizza, right? You have, if pepperoni is the last thing they put on, it's the first thing you see. If sausage was the next thing, it's under that. So basically just kind of works top down, like stacking pieces of paper, whatever analogy you want. Basically it's layer based, so that everything is kind of viewed from top to bottom here. So I have a bunch of different layers, and then what I can do here is there's an eyeball to the right of each layer panel, that little eye right there. When I click on that, it will hide that layer. So if I click on this little eyeball here, it hides that layer and shows you what's underneath it. So there's a lot of things going on here. And then these are all labeled for us. Like we'll see that this one's labeled astronaut, spaceship, Jupiter, galaxy, planets, all that stuff. And basically all of these sit on top of each other. So if I take this astronaut here, I can click on individual things to move them around. So if I click and drag to move this astronaut, you'll see that it's on top of Jupiter, on top of this UFO, because it is closer to the top in the layers than the alien ship is here. So if I wanted the alien ship in front of this, I could click on this alien ship and then click and drag to move it up here. And then notice, I'll zoom in a little bit here. When I click and drag, this little blue line right here that shows up lets me know that I'm moving, that I'm actually going to be successful in moving the layer. When I let go, this alien ship moves on top of that astronaut, and you'll notice that now this alien ship is above him. So if I click on this astronaut, move it, now he's behind there, right? Cool. So that's kind of how the layers work in Photoshop. We can hide and show different content pretty much all day. But if I wanted to make some changes here, I could, let's say I wanted that astronaut to be in the room, right? I could click and drag on the room and move it down below the astronaut, or click and drag the astronaut and move it above the room. So I want to make sure that blue line shows up. And there he is in the room. Cool. So, last but not least, let's say that I like how this looks, but I want to move, like I see Jupiter's over here. Let's say I want to move Jupiter, but I want to kind of see how it is in relation with the room. You'll see that if I click and drag where Jupiter is and try to move it, I move the background here, which is not what I wanted. So if you've ever done any, so I'm going to go ahead and let that go. If you've ever done any word processing before, then it works just like, undo works just like a word processor does, like Microsoft Word or Pages or Google Docs. You can go ahead and hold down Command on Mac, Control on Windows, and then press Z to undo. That will step backwards. Now I'm going to go ahead and I want to go ahead and move this Jupiter layer here. So to do that, I'm going to click on it, and then I can go under Edit, and then Free Transform. The keyboard shortcut for that, and some of my favorites, is Command and T. Command and T will make it so that when I hit Command T, it brings up a highlight box. Then I can move this, kind of drag it where I want. You'll see that it doesn't matter where that Jupiter layer is. Now, you may notice that these bounding boxes have little widgets on the end. That's what these little handles are called. We can use those to change the size of it. So I can click and drag just like I could in any other program to change the size of it, move it where I want. I could rotate it if I want, kind of put it right where I want it to be. Maybe that's kind of what I'm looking for here in the framing that I want. Cool. And then once I'm done, I'll see this check mark up here. I can there's three ways to kind of get out of this once you do the transform. You can click on the check mark, you can press Return or Enter on your keyboard, or you can just click anywhere outside of it. I'll go ahead and hit this guy. And then our selection has been changed and made. And again, if I want to transform it again, I select it and then hold down the Command or Control key, then press T, and then we can move it around. Cool. Yeah, and thanks everybody for joining. Like I said, if you have questions, please feel free to leave them in the chat. You are not interrupting me by asking questions. I'm happy to do my best to help out. So if anything feels fuzzy, let me know. Cool. All right, so those are some of the basics of moving around inside Photoshop layers. What we're going to do now is we're going to go ahead and take a look at retouching in Photoshop and kind of talk about some of the ways we can do it. So to do that, I'm probably going to need to find an image here. So let me see what I got. My Finder. Cool. I already loaded this one. So if I wanted to, so this is a great time to talk about how to bring things into Photoshop. So if you just want to open something in Photoshop and just start editing it, with a Windows and a Mac computer, you can right click on this thing and then go to Open With and then choose Photoshop to move that image. And then they'll open that the same size as the image you have. But if you wanted to bring this image in as a part of a different composition, say this one, for example, we could find the photo here and then just click and drag to move it in. And once I click and drag to move it in, my transform tools come up just like before. And then I can click and drag to adjust the size of this to make it fit. And it kind of looks like that. Then I can kind of move it around to frame it. Okay. But, so that's one way to work it. So the other way to do it, if I just wanted to edit that photo kind of in place and not maybe crop it like I'm doing right here, I would just either go to, I can right click and then open in Photoshop, which is what I'll do here. And then you'll see that we'll create a new window with that where it is. Or I can go to File and then Open and then navigate to where that folder is. I'm going to go ahead and keep this one because this is the aspect ratio that I wanted. And then we're going to talk a little bit about retouching here. Cool. So, great time to talk about zooming in. So what I want to do here is I want to kind of zoom into my image here so I can see these spatial details a little bit better. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and lots of different ways to zoom in. If you have a trackpad, if it takes 2 points of touch, you can pinch and pull to zoom in and out like this. You can also use the zoom tool down here. Click on that. Keyboard shortcut is Z. You can click to kind of drag to zoom in. If you wanted to zoom back out with the zoom tool, you can hold down the Alt key on Mac, Option key on Windows, and then you'll see that plus turns into a minus right there. Then I can zoom out. And then you can press the V key to get back to the standard selection. But my favorite way to do it, probably, because I use a mouse usually or a stylus, is I will hold down the Alt or Option key and then scroll to zoom in and zoom out. That for me works best because it will zoom wherever my cursor is, which is kind of nice. So I'm going to go ahead and zoom in here. And then we're going to go ahead and take a look at what we got going on. So I'll zoom in a little bit tighter because I know that we're on the internet. I want to make sure that we don't lose any detail. And then we're going to talk about some retouching here. So with retouching, there are lots of different ways you can do it. I'm not a big fan of a porcelain face when I edit photos. So mine's a little bit more just like, let's clean up some blemishes and do a few adjustments to it to kind of get the person looking a little bit better. Like they have like a pimple or something, we get rid of that, but I probably won't want to get rid of any major features. So, and it's pretty easy to do. So if we come over here to our tools panel over here, we have the spot healing brush tool. The keyboard shortcut for that is J. There are other tools underneath it. We really want those, the spot healing brush. So, all right, cool. So we'll zoom out and then we'll zoom in. Okay. So we'll notice here that we'll need to rasterize a layer in order to edit it. That's because this layer is what's called a smart object. What smart objects do is that they try and preserve the original pixels of the image that you bring in. And the idea is that it's built to protect you from this, but we're asking Photoshop to create new pixels on top of our existing image, so we'll have to rasterize this for now. So simply click and then just say rasterize the object. That's totally fine. Cool. And now we can get in here. So zoom in a little bit more. Cool. So now you'll notice that this was called the spot healing brush tool. Brush is on purpose. So basically, by learning the spot healing brush tool, you'll learn what a brush is. And brushes, you can do a lot with brushes inside of Photoshop. In fact, a lot of what you do in Photoshop revolves around brushes. So you'll notice this circle pops up in our menu bar at the top up here. And I'll zoom in a little bit just for convenience. We'll see the spot healing brush tool, then we'll see this 19, right? If I click here, this brings up my brushes and their sizes, so I can increase or decrease the brush size, and you'll see that that gets bigger and that gets smaller as I change those. And then we can adjust the hardness and spacing. We're not really going to mess with those too much right now. And then you can choose some of the options here for how we can create this content. So content aware basically means that Photoshop will use its AI to look around the object where you build it and then create the pixels, the new pixels for us, which is what I'm going to do here. But you have a bunch of different options. And then if you're sampling across multiple layers, like if you are trying to do some healing on something that's 4 or 5 layers deep, sampling all layers can be really helpful because it's going to look at everything underneath your layers to create that healing. But we'll just go with content aware right now. And then we can resize this. Now, this is a really big brush. And typically, like if you do like big swatches like this, you'll get some interesting results, which is not what we want. So typically what we'll want to do is called a spot healing brush. We want to use it in spots or maybe use it like in a specific section. And we really want to kind of control the brush size so that we get the best possible outcome. So we can come up here, like I said, to adjust the brush size, but my favorite way to do it is via keyboard shortcut. And again, feel free to ask questions as we go. If any of this feels fuzzy, I'm happy to go over stuff more than once. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to zoom in. So you're going to hold down Option or Alt and then scroll to zoom in here. And then I'm going to change the size of my brush. So to change the size of my brush, if you have a standard QWERTY keyboard, if you look at the P key to the immediate right of it, you'll have a left bracket. Left bracket will make it smaller. To the immediate right of that is the right bracket, which will make it bigger. So So I just want to make this just big enough to cover this. And then I'm going to go ahead and click, and you'll see that did a pretty good job of removing that content. So there's those. We'll go over here, and then we'll scroll over here real quick and zoom in. And get rid of maybe that guy and that guy. Maybe that little bead over here. Maybe that. And then one of those. And maybe that. Maybe that guy right there. Cool. So we can zoom out. And I would argue that it's hard to tell that you did anything here, which is kind of the idea behind retouching. It's that like they were flawless to begin with. So that's the spot healing brush tool, and that's great. But the thing that I did is by editing this way, I've edited in what's called a destructive manner. When you edit destructively, what it does is that it changes the actual pixels that are there, and should something happen a year from now and you need to come back and undo that stuff, you can't. You'll have to bring back the original images and do it all over again. Well, that works great for this. Well, like this, maybe we feel good about this thing. Let me show you one example of where this might not look so good. So I'm going to go ahead and I can undo all of these things just by hitting undo a couple times. You'll see all those things come back. Cool. So, and then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a new layer instead, and I'm going to do the healing brush on that layer. So to create a new layer, in the layers panel at the very, very bottom down here, we'll see this plus button. This plus button here will allow me to add a new layer. If I click on that plus button, you'll see a new layer pops up over here. We'll make sure that new layer is selected. We'll go back to the healing brush tool. And then I mentioned this before, but we're going to sample all layers here first. So that it looks at all the layers underneath. All right, perfect. So I'm going to really quickly go through and do all those things again, which is awesome. Cool. And then I'm going to go ahead and deal with this little, looks like it has a little scar there or something. So I'm going to make this brush just a little bit bigger and kind of paint that away. And then we'll get rid of that. And then maybe we'll get rid of this, and then down here, he's got a little spot on his neck there. And there we go. Cool. And then to pan around, you'll see that I'm kind of clicking and moving around. To pan around, any tool, if you hold down the spacebar key, you'll get this little hand that's called the pan tool. It's going to allow you to move around the composition here. Cool. So now we mentioned that, let's just do a little bit more here. We mentioned that we have that we create a new layer. So why did we do that? Because nothing looks any different. Now you'll see if I hide this layer, now you can kind of see why we did that. So now here's all of our changes on a separate layer that sits on top of this original layer here. So there's a layer before and there's after, right? It looks seamless though, right? So the reason why we may want to do that is let's say that I was doing client work for this person, and this person was an aspiring model who thought that I should go help him capture some images so that he could put them in his portfolio. And then he says, you know, it looks great, but I noticed that you removed that scar on you removed that like little indent or scar on my face. Like that's something that I really like, and I think that makes me unique. And so what I would do here in this case, as opposed to having to kind of jump back and then reload the original image and do all this stuff over again, all I'd have to do, because it's on a new layer, is simply grab the eraser tool, which works just like a brush, and then make sure this top layer is selected. I can drag it up here, and then I can just bring back that feature there. Cool. And that still preserves all the other work that I did. So this is why we would prefer to, as often as possible, work non-destructively with these new layers. And typically you want to name layers here, so I would call this layer, double click on it, we'll name it, excuse me, we'll name this layer Retouch. Retouching. Cool. Sweet. So now we've created this thing, and then we want to get this out to people. So let's talk about saving in Photoshop real quick. So we can go to File, and then we'll just do Save As here for this instance, but if you've never saved the version you worked on before, you'll get that first. So you can either save to your cloud documents, which is great because it allows you to kind of move in between the different devices using Adobe Creative Cloud libraries, you have 100 gigs of Creative Cloud storage to store things on with the standard membership. But I'm going to go ahead and save to my computer just so that it's easier for me to access and remove later after this workshop. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my documents folder, and then I'll call this, you'll see it's labeled untitled 2 .psd. That will not be helpful for me later when I need to go find this file, so I will name this something that makes sense. So I'll call this headshot 1, and I'll save that to this guy. Cool. Then save. Cool. So that saves the Photoshop document. What that allows you to do is close Photoshop, then come back and edit it again later. Now, what I want to do, so I saved it as the Photoshop document, but if I'm trying to share this out, I need to save this out as a different, when you save this out as a different file type, unless I'm sending it to someone for them to continue editing the project, then they will need a copy of Photoshop. But what we'll do here to share this out with everybody is go to export. And then you have a couple of different options here. So you can export as quick export as PNG is kind of Photoshop's fast, like get a copy to somebody right now answer. We won't do that in this case. We have export as, and if you're saving for web, this export for web legacy is great because it allows you to kind of really make the file size nice and small, which is awesome if you are trying to create something that's going to live on a website. Typically, like the people who manage a website will love the fact that you gave them a small file size, and you can get a pretty small file size with a pretty nice image return. But for now, we're just going to go to export as, and then this menu pops up. And from here, we can pick formats. So we have PNGs and JPEGs and GIFs and SVGs. So basically, the two places you're probably going to be living are PNG and JPEG. A PNG is able to have transparent pixels. So that means that if we cut this gentleman out and we wanted like this background to be blank and be like in the background to be whatever we kind of put him on top of, then we want to save as a PNG. In this case, we don't have any transparency, so I'm going to use JPEG. And for most photos, you're going to use JPEG. Then you can pick the sizes here. If you have specific dimensions you need to use, you can do that. You can also have multiple outputs. It's kind of great. But I'm just going to go ahead and hit export here. And then we'll save that as that guy. And then once we go to our downloads folder, then we'll see this picture ready to share out however we want. You can share it through your phone. You can share it through like chat. You can share it through Instagram or whatever you want to do. Cool. Alrighty. So that's kind of a quick look at retouching. Any questions on that before we move on? I'll give that a second for chat to catch up. I know there was a little bit of a delay there. All right. Cool. All right. Well, if any pop up, please put them in chat. We can always come back. Cool. Well, hopefully this has been helpful so far and you've learned something. Let's go ahead and take a look at something a little different, though. Alrighty. So, one thing that Photoshop also allows us to do is that it allows us to do what's called compositing. So what compositing would do would be to kind of cut out an area of an image to place something else either in between or on top of it. So I have this kind of pre-made. I just use the text tool, which is right over here. This text icon allows you to type in text. You'll see this is fully editable. I can type in hello or whatever. Actually, do hello. Cool. And then I can grab this and then Command T to resize it. Cool. So now, I talked about earlier how you kind of want to have an idea of what you want to accomplish here. Actually, I'll go back to eggs because I kind of like that better. So what I want to do is that I want to go ahead and make like a little poster here where this egg layer is on top, where the egg is on top of this word eggs. That's kind of the goal here. So what I'll do is first I have two layers here. I have the background layer, which is the eggs, and I have the word eggs. I'm going to go ahead and move this eggs into position here. And just kind of imagine that these characters are sitting on top of this egg layer. That's what I'm going for. It's kind of what I'm looking for. Again, you just kind of want to, like, in my opinion, like I work best like when I kind of visualize it. You could even jot it down on a piece of paper. Just have an idea of what it is you want to accomplish. And it's a little bit easier to like come into Photoshop and start working with it. So what we're going to do here is I'm going to grab a copy of this layer and then move it on top of the eggs layer, because basically we're trying to kind of sandwich that word eggs in between two layers here. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and right click and then duplicate the layer. And then it's going to call it background copy. We'll call it foreground or just egg front. Cool. And then you'll see that it's still beneath there, so I need to move it. So I can either move eggs down, which is a little easier in my opinion, or move the egg front up. I'm going to click and drag and drop it like that. Cool. So now what I'm going to do, there are lots of different ways to cut this out. I'm going to show you one that I really like and that I think that you should be using because I think they're good habits, and yeah, and it's non-destructive. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go to our quick selection tool, which is W over here. All right, and then the quick selection tool works like a brush. So I'm going to go ahead and bracket up just a little bit, make that brush a little bigger. I'm just going to click and drag to select the egg. And I'd argue this is a pretty easy selection, but the quick selection tool is really good at doing more complex ones too, and we may get to those if we have time. So now I have my selection here, and then with that selection, what I'm going to do over here is come down to this button right here. So this button adds what's called a layer mask. Let's see if I can have that. Cool. This little square with a circle in it adds a layer mask to your composition. So when I add that layer mask, make sure you have the right layer selected, and take a look at this layer. And I'll go ahead and hide this background layer just so we can kind of see it. So I'm going to go ahead and hit this layer mask, and you'll see that it cuts out everything else around that. And the reason, and that's great. And like I said, there are lots of reasons to, there are lots of ways to do this, but the main reason why we want to use a mask is because we can bring back information later if we need it. So now we see the eggs and that and all of that, and then we will show this background layer, and now we see the eggs is on top of there, which is great. So now I can take this and move it down, kind of make it, put it where I need it to be. If I wanted to change my font, super easy. I'll just highlight the text just like we would with any other editor for text, and then come over here to character and then pick one. So I have lots of different fonts here. We'll go with the Internet Classic Impact, and then maybe make that a little bit bigger, just so it kind of fits. So we'll dial. It's like, let's try 1200. Yeah, let's try 1500. You'll see I'm dialing in the value there. Cool. Probably 1400. Cool. Awesome. So there's eggs right now. So it looks all right. Looks pretty good. The last thing I want to do here though is you'll see that eggs has a shadow that falls this way. I want to go ahead and put a shadow on this text that falls similarly. So to do that, I select the layer that I want to put the shadow on, and then under the effects menu, and there are lots of different effects, we can go and then choose drop shadow. Once we select drop shadow here, we will take a look, kind of start building out the shadow. You'll see there's a preview button right over here. This is going to show us, and I'll zoom in a little bit more so you can see it. So on this little square, there's a preview. I happen to know that the shadows are falling this way, so I want to go ahead and make it go that way. That means that the light's over here and pushing the shadows that way. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust the angle here. So it kind of falls similarly. I think it's about right there. And then I will adjust the distance. You'll see that that chooses how far the shadow casts. And we can see a little preview right there as we're doing it. It's pretty nice. And then we can increase the spread and then the size of that shadow. And then to kind of give it that kind of faint look that we're looking at here, I'm going to go ahead and lower the opacity of it quite a bit. And increase the distance maybe a little bit, decrease the spread, increase the size. And then with a little bit of finagling, we get something that's pretty close to what we had there. And the idea is, and actually I'll probably make it a little darker. Cool. That at the very least the light's falling the same way, and that's kind of what we're going for. Cool. So there is our eggs. Cool. Awesome. So again, just to kind of recap, we duplicated the layer. We used the quick selection tool to make a layer to select the egg there. Then we made a layer mask. And then we just moved eggs and then put in an effects there. And effects is represented by this FX key right here. Cool. Alrighty. Let's see what we got. Perfect. Okie doke. So next thing I want to talk about here is sometimes you want to remove content from an image. So here I have two doors. Let's say I wanted to get rid of the left one. Pretty easy to do. What we're going to do first is we're going to select our layer here and then grab our quick selection tool. And then we will click and drag to kind of select the door. And you'll see it does a pretty snappy job of selecting that straight away. I'll just make my brush a little bit smaller, and I can click and drag to add more to this selection. Cool. All right. Cool. Nice, nice. And we'll zoom out. And then these little running ants mean that we've made a selection here. These little like lines, these little guys right here are they call them running ants. Kind of show that the selection's been made. So they're kind of moving along the edge there. Kind of cool. All right, so we've selected our door. Okay, and then I'm just zooming in and out a little bit. And then what we'll do is under Edit, we're going to go to Content Aware Fill. So this will be what you use to kind of create content in a place where there isn't, where you need to remove something. So we go to Content Aware Fill. This menu pops up, and then we'll see that this door is kind of cut out, and that's kind of a cool effect, but not exactly what we're going for. So what we'll do here is we will try and clean up the edges of the door first. So we'll use the lasso tool, which is this guy right underneath there, to click and drag. And just get around those edges here so that we don't see that kind of ghost frame of the door. I'll just connect them. Cool. And you'll see that I think we have a way closer to good result here just with that, which is really nice. And then we can go through and make some additional adjustments. So if we zoom in a little bit more, let's go ahead and we're going to go ahead and add this little swoop here to that section. Cool. Oh, and then, so the green represents kind of what we're pulling from. And I really don't want it to pull from this area right here. So let me go ahead and loop around this just to add it to the stuff that it's recreating. And I would say that we're kind of 90% of the way there already. Just like a little bit of this kind of tar over here on the left-hand side, kind of coming up. That might be believable enough. But the thing is, like, whenever you use Content Aware Fill, what it's doing is that the AI in the program is going through and recreating the pixels every time that we make an adjustment. So if we were to, say, get rid of this area right here where this big hump is, the way we do that is we use this brush tool here, the sampling brush. And then, again, it's a brush, so we can just kind of paint out. I'm just going to paint that area out there, see what it does. So, and then we're telling it not to sample this area. Ooh, not what we want. Cool. So let's not sample this space right here because we don't need it. Then you'll see, I think this looks a little bit more convincing because we don't need it to sample this asphalt because there's already asphalt underneath it. We just need to sample maybe a little bit around it. There we go. I think that looks pretty good. And then we may want to go back to the lasso tool and just grab this little area of door here. We'll see. Cool. Yeah, way better. And then we will hit OK. And then we'll see that door is gone. And then we can go to select and then deselect. Deselect that area, and now we have a blank wall where we can put whatever we want. And the cool thing is that if we wanted that wall back, again, we use this content aware fill, so it's non-destructive. All I have to do is hide that layer. And it comes back. That's where we were, that's where we are. I argue it's pretty good. Cool. So, last thing that we'll kind of talk about here is how to add some filters to make your pictures more interesting. So, I'd argue this is a pretty interesting picture already, but let's go ahead and hit Command and 0 to make it full screen. We'll go back to our selections here. And there are lots of different ways to add filters. There's a whole entire filter menu right here with all sorts of cool stuff. But what I prefer to start with, especially if I'm just trying to adjust colors, is adjustment layers. Because adjustment layers are non-destructive. And they're one of the, and in my opinion, they're one of the more impressive parts of Photoshop. So, once we select this layer here, right next to where the mask icon was, we will find create new fill or adjustment layer. Here is where you will go if you want to add like a solid color, like if you wanted like a red block somewhere on your composition, you would add it here. But this is also where we control brightness, contrast, exposure levels, all that type of stuff. So let's go ahead and we're going to adjust brightness and contrast. So if I adjust brightness and contrast here, then you'll see that I get some sliders in the properties panel. This properties panel is available here, and if you ever don't have a panel like the properties panel, we go under window, you'll see all the available panels here, and then you can pull up properties. So I'm going to go ahead and lower the brightness, and you'll see that lowers the brightness of the image, right? Then slide to the right, increases the brightness of the image. Then we have contrast. So brightness is just kind of how much white is in the image and how much we're pushing those white pixels. And then contrast, if we slide to the left, it's taking the most extreme parts of the image, like the whitest whites and the darkest darks, and moving them closer to a neutral color, which is great. And if we slide to the right, you'll see that these things get more intense and there's more definition here, which is pretty cool. There's also an auto button where it will kind of look at your image and try and increase and decrease the contrast for you, which can be really handy. But you'll see this is a layer, right? So that means that I can hide and show it to kind of see where we were and where we are, which is pretty nice. And then I'm going to go ahead and add another one. So I'm going to go ahead and add a hue and saturation layer here. Cool. So now, if I do that, I can adjust the hue. And you'll see that my picture turns all sorts of crazy colors here, which can be kind of cool. So if I just click on this guy and move to the center, the default value is 0. You can always hit this little button right here to reset any value that you're working on. So that resets the adjustment to 0. Saturation is going to control how vibrant the colors are that you're using. So you see that if I push that really far, it kind of gets this kind of, the pixels start to break and it kind of looks like a 90s music video. And then if I move it to center, it becomes less and less saturated. So if you're looking to make a picture black and white, this is a way to do it. There's also a black and white adjustment layer. And then there's colorize. So what colorize will do is that it will basically tinge the whole entire image an individual color, which is kind of cool. Nice. All right. So let me go ahead and uncheck colorize here and show you that. Now, one of the things that we can do is that we'll notice that there are masks here. So we could, if we wanted to, grab our selection tool here, then just pick these balloons. Okay. Then I can apply a layer directly to them. So with that selection made, go to our selection tool here, and then let's go ahead and change this to we'll go ahead and go with another hue and saturation layer. Now you'll notice here that this is black, right? So that means that only those things are going to be affected by this hue and saturation layer. Another cool reason to use masks. So if I really wanted these to kind of look different, I can change the colors of those blimps without changing the colors of the rest of the image. And that was just by making those selections and then with those selections made, creating the hue and saturation layer, which is kind of nice. And then I can kind of move these over and kind of change the color that I want. Or if I want them to be colorized, I can make them all an individual color like so. Cool. All right. I'm going to go ahead and undo colorize though. I'm going to pump the saturation up a little bit. Then I'll kind of use this bright color there. Cool. Awesome. Alternatively, let's say that we didn't want that. We like this picture, but we don't like the balloons. We talked about the healing brush tool. The healing brush tool might work really well here too. So if I create a new layer, if I create a new layer, and then go to my healing brush, make sure all layers are sampled, bracket this up, and then kind of paint this out. You'll see that I can kind of remove these balloons from the sky. It may take a couple of passes. That's okay. I'm using a pretty small brush. And then we have a clear sky for us to put whatever we want there. And then we could do all the stuff we talked about before. Cool. So lots of different kind of things to look at and work with as you're kind of building this stuff out. And then, yeah, so once you kind of spend some time combining, basically, once you spend some time kind of playing with it, you'll notice that most compositions are going to be a combination of pretty simple techniques like the ones I showed you here. There's a lot of pieces going on, and it does take, and it can take a little bit of time to kind of get comfortable and used to this. Hopefully this gave you an introduction to what these tools look like. And then I'll show you something fun that I kind of built a little while ago. Using this and then one other kind of thing. So I made this a little bit ago. And really what this is some masks and then what's called blending modes here. So let me go ahead and shift my blending modes back to normal. Okay. Cool. So really what this is it's a layer of jellyfish, a cat, and then this guy on a surfboard. And then I use the layer masks to get rid of some content here. So what I did for this was I selected it, and then under blending modes, I just picked a different blending mode for the cat so that the things that I wanted to shine through would shine through. And then, so for this blending mode, I use darker color. Then for this one, I use color dodge, but there's a bunch of different values here. And you'll see that when you hover over it, they have all sorts of different effects that you can apply. That's a really cool way to get some neat stuff pretty quickly. Cool. So I want to make sure I shared that with you guys as well. When you have multiple layers, I would use blending modes. This little section right here where it says lighten will bring out the lightest parts of the image. This section where it says darken will bring out the darkest parts. And you'll see there's some pretty gnarly effects here. Like that's kind of cool too, as you kind of have multiple layers set up. So I encourage you to kind of go play with it. But this is something I really liked that I kind of came up with just by messing around. The way that we'll kind of wrap up this workshop in the last 10 minutes is I'll show you guys a few resources. But while I'm doing that, if you have any questions, please feel free to share them with the chat, and then I will do my best to answer. Cool. Hopefully this is helpful to y'all. So the thing I'll say, like I said, is that this is an initial step in seeing what Photoshop is and learning about it. If you are super interested in deep diving Photoshop and getting a really strong base understanding of it, what I would recommend is if you go to help.adobe.com and you scroll down to Photoshop. In the Photoshop section here, you'll see Getting Started Guide, a User Guide, and Tutorials. I really like the tutorial section, but if you wanted like this is everything that this tool does with all of its nuances, there's a user guide here. But for most people, I recommend the tutorial section. And then there is a Getting Started course that's available right here. One of the reasons why I love the Getting Started course is that you have access to project files to work along with the people that are teaching you. Adobe put together a really good group of people to teach this content, and they created a bunch of sample files for you to work with right along with it, because this is, in my opinion, Photoshop and most of the Creative Cloud softwares. You really want to experience them and you want to kind of work with them. That's what's going to get you good at creating content in them. So If you click on Get Files, you will download the support files here. Then you can go through and follow along with these videos here. They're kind of nice. I'll go ahead and play one right now.
Let's take a look at how Photoshop is laid out to help you get...
So this talks about layout and things like that, but one of the kind of cool things about this is that, kind of like most good websites, you can adjust the speed of your playback too. So you can play it back at 1.5 times speed and get through it 1.5 times as fast. But it'll go through all sorts of different techniques to kind of help you master the basics here. And basically, like I said, if somebody wants to say they have a strong understanding of Photoshop, this Getting Started course, in my opinion, kind of goes through all the basics that you need in order to start really taking advantage of Photoshop and figuring out how to build those projects I was talking about earlier that I said you want to kind of have an idea of when you're creating content. As far as other places to go, we have on our website, adobe.arizona.edu, you will find a bunch of different tutorials here under our training section, under training collection. And then you can kind of pick the software set you want. So if you go to Photoshop, you'll see that we have a bunch of different tutorials on some of the different things you can do with Photoshop for you to take a look at. We're adding more all the time. This particular workshop will be here as well, but they're not all hour long. Like most of these guys are pretty short, like inside of 10 minutes. So we talk about patterns and all sorts of other kind of concepts that you can pull off in Photoshop. And then the last thing I'll say here before we kind of wrap up is we have a training calendar here. So here's where you can find, probably where you found this workshop, but you'll see all of the different workshops that we have available. And then we have this open training here. So what open training is basically we're hanging out, waiting to answer questions with you all. So you can come in, like the link is there via Zoom for you to come in, hang out, and then get some questions answered so we can help you with your projects as you're kind of working through them. Yeah. So, and then I think that's going to about wrap it up for this workshop here. But so if you have any questions, if you haven't gotten them in yet, now's the time. And the last thing I'll show you here is when you create new projects and you select one of these sizes here, you do have some free templates here that you can work with and download that are pretty sophisticated with kind of pre-made layers and things like that for you just to kind of insert content to create all sorts of things. So thank you for hanging out. But if you're looking for kind of unique things to kind of try and do, I would totally take a look at these free, all of these free templates here to kind of get you started. That's another thing you can kind of work with, and you can take these and kind of break them into pieces and use them in your own stuff. And again, if you have questions or we can help out with anything, please let us know. I'll be around for a few more minutes if there are any more questions, but I really want to thank you for being a part of this workshop, and I hope to see you in another one soon. All right, let me know if there are any questions you have, and thank you for hanging out with us today. Oh no, thanks for hanging out, Sarah. I appreciate it. It was good. It's good having you. These are fun. It's nice to be able to walk people through stuff. Alrighty. I'll give it about another 30 seconds here, and then we'll close this out unless there are any other questions. So we'll give it about 30 seconds. All right. Well,